Awesome. Okay, back to my ecology lessons. So I have here one of my favorite things. We have here lichen and moss. Lichen is actually one of my first loves of ecology. I got really excited about it when I was in high school because I started looking at what it's actually made of.
Here's another super cool lichen.
Oh yeah, this is also lichen. Hey, different species. We've got some biodiversity going on. Okay, lichen is my favorite because it's, oh my god, it's my favorite for so many reasons. Where to even begin? Okay, I'm going to begin with what it is. Lichen is a symbiotic relationship between two different organisms. Symbiotic means living together, symbiotic, living together. So this is actually composed of two different organisms. And the two organisms are algae, like the stuff you would see floating in a lake, and fungus. So like a mushroom is a type of fungus, but this is a different species of fungus. And so here's the little story to help you remember how the algae and the fungus live together. It goes like this. Oh, actually you should know in order to understand the story.
Species, that brown one.
Oh yeah, nice lichen here. So algae undergoes photosynthesis so it can make its own food out of sunlight. And fungus has a nice sort of structure, okay?
But it doesn't photosynthesize.
But it does not photosynthesize. Like, you'll often see fungus kind of like growing on the side of a tree or something and soaking up the nutrients from a rotting tree, right? So fungus doesn't photosynthesize, but it has structure, and algae does photosynthesize and make its own food.
But it's kind of squishy.
Right, it doesn't have a structure. It can't stay stiff like this. So here's the story. Oh no, I want to make it gender.
Gender flip it?
Yeah. Albert Algae likes to cook food because algae does photosynthesis, and Franny Fungus likes to build houses.
Oh, got some
And
visitors.
one day, oh,
Hola.
Hola. ¿Una consulta?
Hola.
Sí, ¿qué tal?
¿Saben si arriba hay algún lugar para sacar agua? ¿Para tomar?
El lago está como a 1 hora y media
Okay.
subiendo.
So we were talking about lichen and how it's made of algae, which does photosynthesis, and fungus, which provides structure. So Albert Algae likes to cook food because algae does photosynthesis, and Franny Fungus likes to build houses. And one day, Albert Algae and Franny Fungus took a lichen. But recently, their relationship has been on the rocks. Because oftentimes you'll find lichen growing on rocks. Like anytime you see like pretty orange or green stuff on the rocks and you're like, wow, that rock is really pretty, that's lichen. Lichen is really cool for another reason other than that it's a symbiotic relationship. And that is that lichen is what we call a pioneer species, and it's a really important component of a process called succession. So succession is basically when an ecosystem goes from one type to another over time, right? So basically what can happen is, like, let's imagine we just have bare rock. Maybe there was a volcano or a big fire followed by a flood or something that's getting you down to pretty barren ground. Landslides, that's a great one. Basically all of these plants that we see around us right now need soil in order to grow. So you're not going to have big trees growing right after an event like that, right? So you need something else to kind of build up the soil. That's where lichen comes in. This awesome symbiotic relationship, lichen, does not require soil. It can actually just latch onto the rock or whatever substrate is there, undergo photosynthesis using its algae, and also provide some sort of structure like this with a fungus. So it's really cool. It's like the first species that comes in. Then what happens over time is wind will blow little sediments and little soil particles, which will actually lodge in the lichen. And so over time, you'll actually get a very small soil building up because of the lichen that's on that rock.
And then the lichen right there where that sediment landed doesn't do well, so it starts to grow out. So the lichens grow out and out and make bowls.
Right, so you get these huge bowls of lichen, which helps create more and more soil. So it's good if you want to have succession. Then, oftentimes what you'll find right after lichen is another thing that we see in my hands right here, which is moss. Moss does require soil, right? So, but it's low growing. It doesn't require a lot. It's pretty hardy, and we have.
It requires something organic, so that's why it can grow on bark.
Right.
Is because it needs something it can break down. So usually soil, but it can also grow on trees. But you're never going to find it on bare rock unless there's lichen that's already built that's set up for it.
Right. That not quite soil, right? But like little pockets of soil, kind of. So then you get these moss, and we see a lot of moss in our forest here today. And then over time, more and more soil can build up, and eventually the process of succession, which is, again, the ecosystem going through different stages. You'll have small plants growing, which will...
Grasses, things like that.
Right. And then eventually bigger shrubs, and then those shrubs might eventually be shaded out by bigger trees that grow up through it. And then when you get to an old growth forest, you'll have this really tall canopy and not a lot of shrubs growing underneath. And that's kind of the last stage of succession.
Check
But-
this out.
Whoa.
It's the pincher from a rhinoceros beetle.
It's huge.
So the rhinoceros beetle is like a big beetle like this,
How
and it has
pokey
two
is
of
it?
these in front. It's pretty pokey.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Look how iridescent it is.
Yeah,
You can
it's
see
really
the colors.
pretty. That's so cool.
Sorry, carry on.
Okay. Yeah, I was getting to a really important
I know,
part.
rainforests are cool.
Oh, I just broke it. I'm sorry. Okay, be decomposed. Help the forest. So yeah, you can have like, that would be one stage of succession, is a really tall old growth forest with not a lot of undergrowth. But something that we've forgotten a lot about, sort of in the early decades of conservation, was that when we think about conservation, it's really important to think about preserving the ability of the ecosystem to undergo change, right? So you don't just want to say, okay, here's the perfect forest, it's got some shrubs and some grass, and we want to keep it like this forever. What you actually want to have happen is for natural occurrences, like maybe a fire, to go ahead and destroy those trees so that new ones can grow up, and that helps you maintain a lot of biodiversity and a lot of different plants at different levels of succession over time. So kind of temporal biodiversity is also a really important one to think about. In the United States, for a long time, we did a lot of fire suppression because we assumed that fires were bad and they were dangerous. But what ended up happening is that these forests weren't able to go through their natural processes of succession, and so they became a lot less biodiverse, a lot more vulnerable to being wiped out by some sort of natural event or disease. And what also happened is that we just ended up with a lot of brush. So actually when a fire did eventually happen, it was a lot more dangerous. So now we know that it's important to have some fire to allow ecosystems to go through their natural stages of change. Anything else?
The National Park Service and the National Forest Service were all founded like 1916, like that kind of area. A lot of the growth was right after World War I, when we had a lot of people coming home. You had the Civilian Conservation Corps, and their policy from day one was, if there's a forest fire anywhere in the country on federal lands or on state park lands, you put it out by 9 a.m. the next morning or something like that, like by sunrise the next morning, 6 a.m. And so we put out every single fire as fast as we could. And so that's why we've got this system now that is so overloaded with fuel wood. And there's a lot of trees, like lodgepole pines, that as they burn, they fall and they hit each other so that they make ladders for the fire to go up. And they've got oils that are super combustible in their needles, so they're designed to burn as fast as possible in a way that's really not hot, in a way that's really, if like the whole duff is burning and there's a whole bunch of logs on the ground, it's going to burn a really hot fire, but they're designed to just flash burn really fast.
So it's
and
really
their
dangerous.
seeds, it's dangerous, but their seeds don't open. The cones of lodgepole pines stay shut with pitch until there's a fire. So say you have a forest, like most of the West United States, that you've been, or like in the Southeast, you've got long needle pines, right? Things that are designed to burn. If you don't let them burn, their seeds are never going to reproduce. You're going to have a whole bunch of big trees that get really old and then just senesce. They just get old and tip over and die. And then there's no new seeds hanging out underneath. So those forests are going to die. Also, those fires, if they get really hot, they can kill all the seeds of these things, these pioneer species that are supposed to grow back up after the fire. So you need light, flashy fires just like the ecosystem is designed for. But we, for the last 100 years, have been not letting them do that. So the National Park and the National Forest Service and all these groups have officially changed all their policies since like the 1990s. But we're getting these giant, awful forest fires as a result because it still hasn't, not enough time has passed to let all those fires burn.